Deal or no deal? Are we about to scupper our best chance to save the planet? Tonight, the countdown to the crucial Copenhagen Climate Change Summit has begun. As environmental protesters pitch up in London, is the developed world going to have to sacrifice more for a deal?
If you don't find an agreement and you have to do it with others, you will suffer the consequence of climate change. There's no international barriers now to stop climate change. The evidence is before us.
I'll be asking Douglas Alexander if the government agrees. Good evening. Climate change protesters have set up camp on Blackheath in London to focus minds on a global conference in Copenhagen in a little more than 100 days, which is supposed to save the planet. But there's growing evidence that the deal that's on the table is not fair on poorer countries and not acceptable to rich ones. Here's our science editor, Susan Watts.
Mid-afternoon, and the infrastructure of this year's climate camp is taking shape. Within sight of Canary Wharf, and the banking system, they say, has failed not only us, but the planet too. They've chosen here Blackheath in southeast London, a site linked through history with popular rebellion. It was here in 1381 that thousands of rebels launched the Peasants' Revolt against oppression.
Well, we're here because this year we've seen how disastrous our political and economic system really is.
The climate camp is trying to focus attention on the international conference in Copenhagen in 100 days' time, billed as the world's last chance to strike a global deal on drastic cuts in greenhouse gas emissions.
We need a change of an economy. You can't have an economy with infinite economic growth on a finite planet. It is simply illogical.
Politicians aren't fixing it. They're not making it better, they're making it worse. We keep on seeing these false solutions come out. And in the lead up to Copenhagen, we really need to make sure that we're not actually putting faith in a system which is broken.
The whole international governance framework seems to be hopelessly skewed towards allowing us to continue with business as usual while imposing some form of carbon colonialism on countries in the global south.
We are parliamentarians.
Across town, an old hand at global climate deals, John Prescott, had a strangely similar message. He was using the latest green propaganda film to make his point. Set in 2055, Age of Stupid depicts a devastated world which has ignored climate warnings.
We could have saved ourselves. Search visible impacts of climate change leading up to 2010.
101 degrees Fahrenheit. It's the hottest day ever recorded.
700 people are now feared dead after the strongest ever recorded day's rainfall in India's history.
Now it's official. The past year has been the driest in Melbourne's history.
John Prescott now speaks for parliamentarians across Europe. Launching their New Earth deal today, he said rich countries must make the deepest cuts first.
Countries are underwater and 1.5 million people are affected.
We poison the world with our policies and development and have enjoyed it with our style of life. Developing countries have got billions living less than $2 a day. We have to give them a fair shake to develop, and rich countries have a moral case to recognise that, as well as a good economic one, because if there's no agreement at Copenhagen, we all suffer, develop or developing.
His message is tough news for greedy consumers such as Americans and Europeans. Prescott backs those who say we should cut greenhouse gas emissions globally by around 80% by 2050, with the developed world cutting most and first, and developing countries growing and emitting at first, but coming into line later until we all emit the same.
People feel Ireland's remaining farmland.
But with just 100 days to go until the Copenhagen conference, negotiations already appear to be in trouble. Politicians in the developed world have yet to convince voters to make such cuts, let alone persuade developing countries that they can be trusted to deliver in time.
Across the entire continent.
I think the negotiations are treading water at the moment. I think there's been a real sort of sense of a loss of momentum. So I think we now need a much more vigorous political action. That means taking it away from the negotiators and looking much more towards foreign ministers, much more towards national leaders themselves. We want a kind of political surge on climate change, much as we've had a surge in Iraq, a real focused effort to drive forward towards Copenhagen. Otherwise, I think there's a real danger of us getting nothing very useful.
And if we believe we need to avoid anything like the extreme future depicted in Age of Stupid, then rich countries may not only have to make cuts but stump up cash to help developing countries to adapt to the climate change that's expected to come their way.
The two main things are, firstly, how much money is going to be available to address the climate change problem, both for mitigation and adaptation. And the order of magnitude we're looking at are several $100 billion a year. The second bigger problem is how much reductions in emissions the rich countries are prepared to make. And that will probably take some time, and we'll probably not see a final agreement till December in Copenhagen on that issue.
The climate campers plan to take direct action against city institutions over the next week. But getting international agreements that work takes longer, and it may take an effort on the same scale as that used to rescue the financial system to rescue the planet.